Okay, here we go. For those not able to escape the troubles of today by flying to Cancun, we are glad that you are able to be with us this afternoon to attend the very last Roger That session of our 2 days of our conference. For the next few hours, we are going to take you to places that you have never been, as we have invited to this panel masters of the virtual, special effects wizards, and space artists whose work creates realities that we see on moving screens, on the pages of books, and framed on the walls of our homes. From still paintings to motion pictures, these folks take us where we've never been, to see the unseen and imagine the unimaginable. Joining us live are three luminaries whose many achievements include Emmy-winning visual effects and Hugo Award imagery. Our panel will present to us one-of-a-kind experiences in virtual virtuosity. Unfortunately, our third panelist, Robert Skotek, will not be able to join us this afternoon. I'm so thrilled to host this session. As you can see around me in my background here, I'm fascinated by the art of special effects, and even more so now that it allows me to escape the COVID madness. When the panel first came together, I wrestled with how we could most effectively do justice to the amazing talent that's going to be presented before us. I quickly came to the conclusion that even with the miracle of special effects, I could not fit what they collectively had to offer in under 60 minutes. So I asked our Roger That planning committee to put our session at the very end of our 2-day event. So you will notice that our session is listed as starting at 3 p.m., but nothing comes after us. We have no end time. We can go on forever. But since our guests have lives, this is the format that we will run this afternoon. I will introduce each of our guests who will present a 20-minute presentation. These three presentations will occupy the first hour of our sessions. After our three guests are done, we will then open up our session for a panel discussion. It is during this time that we will present questions from the audience, so please post your questions during the first hour, and we'll save these for the second hour of our panel discussion. Now, we can go longer than 2 hours if need be. Through the miracle of special effects, we can distort time and space. But out of courtesy for our guests, we'll try to limit our time to that of a 2-hour-long feature film. So grab some chips and salsa and get back in your favorite comfortable chair, and we're going to begin our special effects session with our very first presenter, Vincent DeFate. Vincent DeFate has enjoyed international reputation as one of the leading artistic visionaries of the future. In his prolific career, he has produced works of science fiction, fantasy, astronomical, and aerospace art, and has received many awards, including a Hugo. A founding member and past president of the Association of Science Fiction and Fantasy Artists, Mr. DeFate was a 2011 inductee of the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. A prolific writer, he has authored some 300 articles for magazines and book publication and has produced 3 major books. A full professor at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, Mr. DeFate co-created their film program. So without further delay, Vincent DeFate.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. So I've been a science fiction fantasy illustrator for more than half a century, and have produced somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6,000 works for publication. So I'm an old hand at this. Not so much an old hand at Zoom or PowerPoint or any of that. But let me go into share mode and see if I can get my desktop going here and open up my PowerPoint presentation. Let's see here.
Yep, it's coming through fine.
Okay, great, good. All right, so let me get through this because there are probably only a few things I truly hate about the experience of living. One of them is doing these presentations. So let me get through this. I started illustrating in 1967 when I was still an art student, but I was heavily influenced by many of the same artists and many of the same media entities like the films of George Powell, for instance. that will have affected the other speakers today. So I'll dispense with that and start with the art heroes. First and foremost on my roster of artists who influenced me was Chesley Bonestell. Ron Miller and I were on a panel discussion just last weekend, and I happen to mention that I knew Chesley Bonestell's name before I knew the name of Norman Rockwell. I would see Bonestell's work in Collier's and in Life magazine, his name rather neatly lettered, and was really impressed by his images that just simply transported me to another place. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bonestell's work. I won't go into the deep detail of it, but he had a very important affiliation with George Pal, particularly on movies like Destination Moon and War of the Worlds. My first real in-depth awareness of him really came through a Life magazine series called The World We Live In, which talked about the evolution of the Earth and showed his incredible astronomical paintings, and it also included a grand tour of the solar system. Another artist whose work hugely impressed me was the work of Richard Powers. I knew Dick personally, and we had many shared experiences over the years. Dick was an abstract surrealist, had a serious fine arts career, but supplemented his income with the fast turnaround from working in the paperback market. And his work had a sophistication to it and a kind of decorative flair that was also transportive. Even when it had almost nothing to do with the story inside the covers, his work seemed to evoke the spirit of the fantastic. In the late 1950s, there was the licensing of the Universal Library of fantastic films, beginning with Dracula and Frankenstein and the various sequels. After the first iteration of Shock Theater, they had a horror show host by the name of John Zackerly. And Zackerly edited two anthologies, Zackerly's Midnight Snacks and Zackerly's Vulture Stew. And I was just dumbfounded by these. So, and of course, Powers had done the illustrations. So that kind of got me going. The leading illustrator in the paperback market in the 1960s was Paul Lair. Paul Lair had been a student of Stanley Melsoff's at the Pratt Institute, and Paul and I also became good friends. Unfortunately, Paul died of pancreatic cancer in 1998. But Paul had a way of manipulating color that was enormously mood-inducing. And it was really through his work that I realized that color could be a very significant component of creating illustrative works that were transportive. I own the original De Grimm's World. That's the image in the upper left of the screen. And the actual painting itself is, the background's actually ultramarine blue, which is a blue in the kind of violet range. So you can see there's actually been something of a color shift in the reproduction. I also own the image on the right of this screen, and that was done for the Astounding Science Fiction Anthology, edited by John W. Campbell Jr. And John Campbell was the first person to actually actively buy my work. He kept me busy for the first year and a half or so of my career, and then quite unexpectedly died. John thought that he was going to live to be 400 years old, and I think he was off by quite a bit. I think he was around 63 when he passed away. But there was no question that John Campbell was the formative influence on the field of modern science fiction literature. And of course, Frank Frazetta, I think no matter whether you painted like him or not, Frazetta was one of the artists who really popularized fantastic storytelling in the 60s and 70s. And one of the things that I really liked about Frazetta's work was the fact that he was also an artist whose work I was familiar with through comic books, and he illustrated the Barsing series for the Science Fiction Book Club. So his black and white interior work was also pretty wonderful. He wasn't just a painter. Not that there's anything just about being a painter, but he was also a complete talent. Charles Knight, the foremost dinosaur artist, most of what we think we know about dinosaurs really descends to us through the work of Charles Knight. The interesting thing about Knight is that Knight was declared legally blind at the age of 16. He actually informed his works by sculpting and did some marvelous watercolors. This painting is actually a watercolor, but watercolor in the way it was used by English watercolorists at the end of the 19th century, a mixture of transparent and opaque pigments. Wonderful, wonderful paintings. And in addition to Charles Knight, another dinosaur painter who sent me into orbit was Zdeněk Burian, who was a Czechoslovakian artist who sneaked past the Iron Curtain in a book called Before Man, which was really a wonderful book that reproduced some of his early paleontological illustrations. But the great thing about Burian is that he also did great speculative paintings, and this idea of feathered reptiles evolving into Archaeopteryx, and also his ability to paint humans. Really good figurative painter, just actually an all-around illustrator. He wasn't just a paleontological illustrator. He worked in all aspects, from scientific illustration to general fiction illustration. In the magazines, there was probably no black and white artist more powerful than the scratchboard artist Virgil Finlay. Finlay did some color covers, but they pale in comparison to his very striking and very dramatic black and white work. And while my black and white work is absolutely nothing like his, it really inspired me to want to master a black and white technique. I'm still working at that after 54 years in the business, but he was truly the master at this, particularly considering how little he was paid for his work back in the pulp era. Stanley Melsoff. Melsoff was an expert spear fisherman, and in the last couple of decades of his life really specialized in creating these incredible underwater paintings. He was able to capture that dapple lighting of the underwater world, and they're really quite painterly. They're rather large original paintings painted in oils. But he really started his career in paperbacks, and in addition to doing some sordid romances with his studio mate James Zavadi, who was a real pioneer of early paperback illustration. Melsoff was one of the first illustrators, along with Schultz, to really specialize in science fiction illustration. But even then, the influence of the underwater world, the way he used light, and the way that he clothed his astronauts in space leotards, they're really basically wetsuits. And his weapons are almost always spear guns. So the influence of his hobby interest in underwater spearfishing is there. That's actually Melsoff in the spacesuit, and he only did about 15 of these, but they're just really amazing, groundbreaking works. And I honestly believe that the Puppet Masters, his painting for the Heinlein novel, which has almost nothing to do with the novel itself, is one of the true masterpieces of science fiction art. The image on the right is for The Demolished Man. Really wonderful, wonderful paintings, and far exceeding anything was being done in those early days of paperback art. Another hero of mine was James Bama. Jim and I got to know each other when I wrote a book called Infinite Worlds, but there was no one who brought back realism to the paperback field with more of a vengeance than James Bama. Jim could paint detail that wasn't there, even though you knew his reference sources. I mean, he would even paint, for instance, this cover painting for King Kong. The main photo reference that he used was produced by the RKO publicity department back in 1933. And to position Kong's arm in the right place, they never bothered to carefully cut and mortise. They just simply tore the photograph. And Jim actually duplicated the tear in the photographic reference. That's what Jim was capable of doing, you know, painting detail that was there and the detail that really shouldn't have been there. I remember he did a really great painting of a Nazi for a paperback cover, and had used a rented costume, and the costume had sat on a wire hanger for years, and the crease from being folded over the wire hanger was in the costume when Steve Holland put the costume on, and he actually duplicated the crease. So that was Jim. But look at this stuff. It's got a magic to it that's really quite remarkable. He did he did 62 of the first 64 Doc Savage covers. And having done serials myself, I know how hard it is to sustain interest and quality when you're doing that many, and you're and there's no way to escape repeating yourself. Another, I think, kind of interesting point, and the reason why I have the reproduction juxtaposed with an image from a photograph that I took from the original art, is for the non-artist to understand issues of color shift and so forth in the reproduction process. You also see a collapsing of the values and a kind of cranking up of the color saturation. And Jim also did this in 1966. He had an advertising job to do for CBS, where NBC, where he did paintings of their major television shows, including Bonanza and Star Trek. Star Trek I was in college at the time when Star Trek was on the air. And it was the first time that the mass media really presented science fiction like the literature that I was reading on the written page. The science fiction movies of the 50s and even early 60s had almost nothing to do with literary science fiction. It was really more about the Cold War, about communism and the McCarthy era. But Star Trek was something else again. Of course, it was 10 years out of date. It was much more like the literature of the 50s. But nonetheless, science fiction had finally come of age in the media, although Star Trek just creaked by in the ratings. And then John Schoen here. Jack was a dear friend. Ron and I actually visited him with our respective spouses some years ago. I think it was the last time I saw Jack face to face, but Jack and I would speak on the phone a couple of times a month. Jack had aspirations of becoming a wildlife painter, and he was very, very good at it. To my mind, one of the best wildlife artists ever. Jack was, in my mind, unquestionably one of the best compositionalists ever to work in the commercial field of illustration. Some of his wildlife work, and then some of his science fiction work. The image on the left is an interior illustration that he did for a George R.R. Martin story called "And Seven Times Never Kill Man," which is unequivocally lifted for the design of Chewbacca in the original Star Wars: A New Hope. And that I know is a fact. You can ask me how I know, but I know that as a fact. And Jack was also an incredible scratchboard artist. And again, Jack also had problems with his vision. He wore very thick glasses, and he saw things in terms of big shapes. So there's a very strong abstract core to all of Jack's work. So those were my heroes. Now let me just get back to the business of me. A portfolio of images. This was really the first book cover I did. I had done a couple of magazine covers before I got to this stage, but this was my first cover. I'm just going to go through these. Very early in my career, I got typecast as a gadget painter. I was trained as a figure painter, and I wanted to do figurative work, but started doing stuff like this because that's where the demand was. Did some aerospace stuff, but basically trying to make a spaceship come to life. That was really the trick. And Ron will be the first one to tell you the constellation Pegasus is flipped. And that's because the art director said he wanted the Pegasus figure to be facing the copy lines. That's one of the things that art directors can do in the universe of publishing, and that is rearrange the universe at will. I painted a couple of closely related styles. At one point, the presence of brushstroke became a very important thing in the way I painted. This is for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Of course, the giant squid is vastly beyond the size of the giant squid that we know of. But this one was actually done as a piece of concept art. There was a company named Synergy, which subcontracted to Disney. And they had a 2-picture deal. John Carter of Mars was the first of them, which that was in the early 1980s. That very same script was used for the film that was finally released in the early 2000s. But the other thing that they wanted to do, and they had hired me to work on both, was to do concept work for a proposed remake of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which Disney still held the licensing to. This is for John Wyndham's Out of the Deeps. I'm not even going to name these. And in fact, I've forgotten the titles of most of the books on which they appeared. This is for War of the Worlds, and I probably have illustrated War of the Worlds at least 5 times. And then there's the George Powell film, which I've illustrated a few times too. I have never really gotten it right, but, but one of these days, my hope is that I will. Wells is very specific about the articulation of the legs in the tripods. This for George R. Martin's novel, I think his first. It was serialized in analog and called After the Festival. This is for Mac Reynolds' novel called A Future Fears. And I don't even recall what this was for. And then I did some movie-related stuff. This was for a commemorative 50th anniversary limited edition print. Creature from the Black Lagoon was one of my favorite films growing up. And I've had something of an association with the creature ever since. This was an illustration that I did for Bob Burns. Bob used to put on Halloween shows at his home in Burbank, California, and he would get press coverage because he was a film editor for their news division. And he asked me if I would, and what he did is they had actually filmed in 16 millimeter some of the Halloween shows. And he asked me if I would do some of the interstitial stuff in between the bits that went into great detail on these Halloween shows. So these were actually made up, these were actually animated by a fellow by the name of Van Ling, really wonderful technical animator who did presentation work on a lot of the Alien movies when they were finally released in video. But these were literally peeled from layers of paintings that I had been doing over the 50 odd years of my career at the time and animated by him. So they had a limited takeoff animation and panoramic animation also. It was great fun to see these come to life, very similar to the opening of the War of the Worlds, where we get Bonestel's grand tour of the solar system. In this one, they made my painting of the skeleton transparent so that when the skeleton popped up, you'd be able to see the cemetery behind. And then another friend of mine, Greg Nicotero, who later became pretty well known for his work on The Walking Dead, wanted to try his hand at directing. He directed a short film called The United Monsters Talent Agency. And since we were mutual friends with Bob Burns, he asked me if I would create the package art for his film, which was released in DVD, I guess in the early 2000s. Now I understand that Greg, who is a co-founder of K&B EFX, they do mostly makeup effects, is now directing and has directed many of the episodes of Walking Dead. This was an earlier painting that I did, this for a book called The Encyclopedia of Monsters. And the gimmick here was really to create a vision that resembled the classic monsters, but without infringing on the licensing owned by the studio. So they're kind of monster lookalikes. This was for a Mike Resnick short story collection. This is for Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. This was for the Science Fiction Book Club edition. This was for a great story about an isolated island where the Archaeopteryx still survives. This was an analog cover, and I don't remember exactly what it was for. This was a wraparound cover for something else. And I've also been doing a series of CD covers for a friend of mine who owns a company that specializes in doing movie soundtracks. These are two of them. The soundtracks are great. I can't speak as well for the package art, but the soundtracks are wonderful. And this for Reed Magazine, and this was actually done for an audio dramatization online company. And this has had quite an afterlife. It's been used on T-shirts, and well, I'll show you as we go through the presentation. In addition to creating the art, there is a process involved, and it usually starts with me doing these thumbnails in the margins of the manuscript and then refining them. I usually do this without any kind of reference because I don't want to let the reference drive my work. I'll go off and shoot the reference that I need, or I'll create a maquette or something, or I'll just simply rely on my imagination from there. But you can see refinement. These aliens went through a whole development stage, and then showing the creature in different positions, all part of the process. And then I'll go to a color sketch. And one thing I've learned in decades of dealing with non-visual people is that the more you show them of what you intend to do, the less trouble you have down the line. Even if you turn in an absolutely miserable painting, if you did a great sketch, they're with you. You know, they're in your corner. So I do very comprehensive color sketches, and the color sketches actually simplify the process of doing the finish because I'm dealing with the real life issues that an illustrator is going to deal with, color and value. So I'm blocking them in the sketch, I'm refining them in the finish, and it's really like falling off a log. There's no mystery here. I know what I'm going to get at the end. And that's my basic MO. I'm going to show you two more. These are both done for Scientific American. When I got this one, this was about for an article about our return to the moon. I gave them a heads up. I was in the midst of doing some concept work for a movie, and I told them, look, at a moment's notice, I might have to pull out of this. But the art director was very accommodating. He says, if that's the case, then so be it. And that's precisely what happened. I never got to do this finished painting. But the other one was a double page spread, and the sketch is fairly close to the finish. That's the finish. Not much difference between the two, some refinement. And this is about faster than light travel using the gravity well of Saturn to leave the solar plane. And these are some sketches that I did by my friend Bob Burns. Used to be a gorilla actor, and he has a very famous suit called Kogar, the gorilla, and that's the original head for Kogar. And there was a plastic toy company that wanted to do a model kit with interchangeable heads, and they said, well, go ahead and give us a sketch. But leave some space on the bottom so we can do some photographic inserts of the alternate heads. A Bob head, this is the Kogar head, and this is actually the Tracy head. A good friend of his, Rick Baker, resculpted the head for a more benign looking gorilla. So these are the sketches. I didn't include the finish in this. But what I did was I didn't like the idea of having the insert intrude on my painting. So I went ahead and I put Bob's head on a pike along with the Kogar head. And I showed it to the client. The client said, you know, Bob's going to be really upset. And I said, you don't know Bob the way I do. Bob's gonna think this is a hoot. So I showed it to Bob. Bob called me up about 20 minutes later laughing, and that's what we went with. So that ended up being the box art. Well, a little bit more refined. The finished painting was a little bit more in the tradition of what Jim Bama had done for the Aurora model kits. That was kind of the look I was going for. So a little bit more refined, and this is a little bit looser than the finish. So over my 50 some odd year career, I've done a ton of these black and white interior illustrations. I'll just run through these fairly.
Vincent, I think we're going to have to wrap things up. If you could give us maybe 5 more minutes.
Yes, I'll go through these. I'll go through these pretty fast. I'm sorry, I knew I was going to get long.
That's okay.
Let me just get through these. So these are scratchboard. They're pen and ink on scratchboard.
I don't get to see much of your black and white work very often.
Well, it's been on the pages of Analog and Weird Tales and publications like that. But this is what it looks like before it hits that pulpy paper that they use. And I don't really even remember the stories these were done for. I know that's going to be enormously insulting to any authors out there whose work I've illustrated, but this nonetheless is what I've been doing. Occasionally I'll do something in halftone. This is acrylic. And then I've done concept art. A lot of it I can't really even talk about because I've signed non-disclosure agreements, but this I can talk about. This was for Greg Nicotero. Greg wanted a pitch for the remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon. I did about 40 different character designs. This is what we ended up with, and then the project got mothballed, but I have hopes that the creature is going to come back from the dead. The studio has been trying to remake Creature from the Black Lagoon since 1967. One of these days we'll hit pay dirt. And then I've taken up sculpture. This is actually a sculpture that has been cast in bronze for limited edition, a high-end collectible. Some of the Science Fiction Hall of Fame in 2011 and the Illustrators Hall of Fame in 2019. So that's it for me. And this is the afterlife of my art. This is a company in Poland that has this international clothing line based on my work. This is one of about 5 designs that we've been using. So that's what I've been up to. I'm going to just relinquish control of the screen, and let's see if I can do this without setting myself on fire. How does one get out of this?
I think it's at the top. Usually everything's a bright green color near the top.
Yeah, I see.
There you go. Now you're out.
I'm out. Thank God.
Yep, I see you.
It's a lot easier on WebEx, but okay.
Well, that's.
I just stopped this sharing.
That is amazing. I definitely escaped. There's a wonderful, wonderful assembly of an incredible career that was presented there. I think giving some suggestions here is we are going to ask you a few questions because of the freshness of the presentation versus the questions. So if the others will agree to that, we'll probably do it that way. One of the questions that came from person here is, how long does it take? This is from Catherine. How long does it take to do a pen and ink interior illustration, and how long for a full oil painting?
Well, first of all, I don't work in oils, I work in acrylic. And acrylics dry more quickly. Oils really do have a drying process, even when you're using drying accelerators. An acrylic painting will take me anywhere from 3 to 5 days, depending on size. Biggest thing I've ever painted was a painting for NASA, and that took me 5 days. I have a very short attention span, so getting it done as quickly as I can is my basic MO. The black and white stuff goes very, very quickly. I can do 2 or 3 black and white illustrations in a day. I don't usually show sketches for the black and white work, so I'm going from my thumbnails, which the clients don't even see, right to a finish, and the client sees the finish. Like it or don't like it, and then I'll make whatever changes from there, because scratchboard is a very easy medium to change. You can just sand out what they don't like and put in what they do like, but I very seldom get changes. I've been doing this for so long, I have a kind of intuitive sense about what I should be doing.
Yep.
Vinny,
Right.
I was reminded of when Chesley Bonestell was asked that very same question once. How long does it take to do a painting? He said about a week and 40 years of experience.
And that's exactly true.
That's like, you know, the plumber that comes in and is done in 5 minutes and charges $500, and people wonder, you know, it's what you know, it's your experience that you're, you know, that you're doing.
Yeah, but Glenn, I'm not going to do your plumbing for you. So let's move on.
I have another question here from the same Catherine, which is really intriguing. She says, did you often get to meet the authors of the stories you illustrated, or were you quite removed or remote from either the writer or the story, or both? Did you interact with them? Was that kind of common?
Mercifully far removed from the authors. I do know that I bump into authors at conventions all the time. As a matter of fact, one important thing, George R.R. Martin, who's probably best known for Game of Thrones, I illustrated his first novel for Analog. And I did that painting of that Batwing vehicle. And literally, Analog was going through a machine of a month phase. For, you know, Star Wars had kind of transformed the landscape. Hardware in that movie was enormously popular. And so they would, I was asked specifically to find a piece of hardware to put on the cover. Meanwhile, the novel is actually a Talking Heads novel. It's about inner conspiracy and so forth. And it's on this planet that is in a very strange elliptical orbit that only sees daylight for a very short period of time. As a matter of fact, when it was published as a book, it was retitled "Dying of the Light." Anyway, long story short, George writes literally 2 sentences. The hero gets into, and not direct quote here, but he says the hero gets into a bat-winged anti-gravity vehicle and he flies to the other side of the planet. So I'm on a panel with George, and George decides he's going to pay me a compliment. And he turns to the audience and he says, Vincent did an absolutely perfect example of what I wrote. And I'm thinking to myself, Batwing vehicle flying to the other side of the planet. That was it. I mean, there was nothing else. But apparently, whatever those words suggested to me tapped into what it was that he had in mind. I've also had authors incensed over what I've done. But, you know, sometimes you have to go outside of what's there, because sometimes there isn't a lot of there. Authors tend to be non-visual. Artists are just the reverse. And probably the worst part of it is when you do movie stuff and 3/4 of the people who have their finger in the pie have no visual sense at all and insist that they're going to justify their salaries by picking on the artist and having him do something that has absolutely no visual intelligence to it at all. And you have to find a way to mollify everybody and keep everyone happy. And there's always a way around it. I mean, otherwise we'd have no longevity in this industry at all. But so be it.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Vincent.
My pleasure.
We've got some more questions here, but I just want to remind everyone that we are not limited to 1 hour on this session. We are going for at least 2 hours, maybe longer. So please continue to post your questions. There's a few of them that came through that look like good general ones for the panel discussion as a whole. So we'll keep those for that time. So we want to move on now to our next presenter within our science fiction panel discussion, and it's Ron Miller. Ron Miller is an illustrator and author specializing in science, especially astronomy and science fiction. His work can be seen regularly in magazines such as Astronomy and Scientific American. He is the author, editor, and co-author of nearly 60 books, many of them recipients of awards and recommendations, including a Hugo for his biography of Chesley Bonestell. He has created postage stamps and contributed production art and special effects art to motion pictures, most notably Dune. So without further ado, we'll present our next visionary, which is Ron Miller.
Well, hello. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for asking me. This is fun. I'm not going to show a PowerPoint because my PowerPoint maker blew up. So I'll have the next best thing. So it should work okay. I'm going to throw modesty to the winds and start off with my own work, simply because I like it. Let me get on to share screen here. There we go. I started doing space art digitally about 20 years ago when I discovered I wasn't going to make a deadline. I had to write and illustrate 10 books about the solar system, one for each planet. And I got the first painting done. I thought, oh, there's no way in the world I can make this deadline. I had to do 3 books every 2 months or something. And a lot of my friends were saying, Ron, you should paint digitally. I said, I didn't want to do that. It's going to look generic. So I swallowed hard, tried one, and I showed it to my colleagues. And the first thing they said was, oh, it looks like a Ron Miller painting. That's all I needed to hear. So up until I got sequestered during the pandemic, all my space art for the last 20 years has been digital. So I thought I should show maybe my 10 I kind of picked at random. I got like 1,000 of these things. But I'll start off with this. This is in the foothills of Titan's mountains. I really like Titan a lot. I think I've got at least 12, 15 illustrations of Titan. I could do a whole slideshow on Titan. I think the place is absolutely fascinating.
Ron, is there any way you could do a full screen on your image there? Or is that?
That's probably going to be as big as it's going to get.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that.
Nope.
You need a bigger screen. It looks big here. So, yeah. Actually, this fills my screen, so I don't know if I could have made it any bigger as a PowerPoint anyway. But this is a methane waterfall pouring into a methane sea on Titan. One of the things I try to do in my space art is make these things seem as believable to other people as they are to me. I mean, these are real places. They aren't things I've made up. They aren't things that are fantasy. These are as real as Utah or Florida or, the Bahamas or the Sahara Desert. And so I try hard to give a sense of reality to these worlds. Another view of Titan. This is just after a methane storm. And you can see the storm out here in the distance going away and a fuzzy little Saturn up here. I think occasionally you might get a glimpse of Saturn dimly through the clouds on Titan. I don't think it's at least that's what I would like to think. I'm trying to think what to say about these things. I do them with a sense of so much reality. I sometimes hold my breath to avoid, inhaling the methane. Another favorite world of mine is Enceladus. This place is fascinating to me too, largely because of its geysers. These things are roaring out of these fissures at really the speed of a jet engine exhaust. And they're shooting ice particles and other matter, a couple of 100 miles into the sky of Enceladus. So this is got some little astronauts here. I'll sometimes do that. I've taken a clue from Albert Bierstadt. We do these, magnificent panoramas of, Yosemite and Yellowstone, but there'd be little deer or little mountain climber somewhere on a rock or in the foreground. And they give these things a sense of scale. I think that's important in a picture where the landscape is so unfamiliar that you don't know what the size of any of this is. Now, this could be a crack only 3 feet wide, so far as anybody knows. So adding little astronauts helps establish that scale. And since these are ice particles, I tossed in a sundog, largely because I really, really like watching sundogs in the winter. So I like putting these in the pictures. By the way, ask questions as you go along. If anybody wants to know any more details about these things, I'd either be glad to answer the question or make up something that sounds plausible.
One of the questions that might be relevant to your work, I'm not sure how much of your work is digital, but one person asked, what program do you favor for your digital work? And
well, so far, all these have been digital, but they're
okay.
kind of a mixed media. I use a little program called Terrigen a lot to help generate the landscape shapes. I don't know what I'm gesturing for, you can't see me. But after that, there's a lot of post work just by hand in Photoshop. So these are largely Photoshop things. You'll see later on where I have some examples where they really are mixed media. I take photographs wherever I go. I have thousands of my files of everything from rocks to trees to sand dunes to people, animals. It's a huge morgue of this stuff. I'll draw upon that too. So sometimes rocks in the foreground will be real rocks out of my files that I photographed on the beach somewhere or something. So how each picture was done depends a little bit on which picture you're talking about. Enceladus again. There are signs that there are not only geysers, but hot springs on Enceladus. And this is an Enceladian hot spring, or however the phrase might be. Scoot this over a little bit here.
And for those not familiar, Enceladus is one of the moons of Saturn.
It's this tiny little moon, about 500 miles wide. You'd have to actually sort of cling to it for walking around if you wouldn't want to drift off from it. But it has a moon-wide subsurface ocean of liquid water. And they found organic compounds in the plumes. So Enceladus has become one of the prime targets for the search for life in the solar system. It's warm underneath. It's got all the right chemicals. So Enceladus, the subsurface ocean of Europa, and Titan are two of the main targets for the search for life in the solar system. And back up here. I had to have at least one Mars picture, so I picked my favorite one. It's a generic scene on Mars. It's got everything. It's got red rocks. It's got sand dunes. It's got a dust devil. I love painting these things because I love watching dust devils.
Your paintings look better than the real thing. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And that's
I feel that way about Chesley Bonestill's paintings. He gets criticized a lot for making painting a moon that was very Doré-esque with its craggy mountains and precipitous peaks. The moon didn't look like that at all, as it turned out. But I think it's really the moon's fault that it didn't turn out looking like a Bonestill painting, because that's how it should have looked.
That's an interesting raises an interesting question, since you have been doing these works for so long, especially images on the surfaces of other known worlds, the solar system and their moons. Are any of your earlier works, I guess using perhaps Pluto as a prime example, found to be either so different or so familiar to the real thing that you had to pause?
I've had artwork go out of date while I was working on it. So, I'll just label it, historic impression of what Titan once looked like or something. But every once in a while, if you do your homework, sometimes you'll hit on, at least generically, how something will look. You won't get specific features because, you know, who knows what those might be. But the general aspect of a world sometimes isn't that hard to get. Truthfully, Bonestel should have known better. He owned a book, published in 1937, by an artist astronomer named Lucien Rudeau. I have Bonestel's copy of the book here, so I know he had the book. And in it, Rudeau points out that if you take a telescope, look at the limb of the moon, you know, against the black sky, you can see the mountains in profile. Rudeau had a drawing showing, you know, these, you know, rounded mounds. You can see them. And Bonestel had this book, and he was an astronomer in his own right. So I think Bonestel consciously chose to paint the moon the way he did, simply because it was more dramatic and more romantic, really. I think, truthfully, we wouldn't have been quite so excited, at least the public, about going to the moon if we thought it looked like South Dakota. So I think Bonestel really did us a favor by misrepresenting the moon in that respect. Another Mars. This is asteroid impact on Mars, melting a few zillion tons of subsurface ice and causing a tsunami. There's signs of this having happened. And this miles high tsunami, you know, scouring the Martian surface. And how could you not want to illustrate that?
I know in the case of Bonestel, Ron, in a lot of his paintings, he included pictures of astronauts or people for scale or spaceships. I'm not sure if that's true on your artwork, but maybe I haven't seen enough of it. But is that something by choice that you've decided not to include, or the advantages for including or not including?
Back up here, there's a couple of astronauts right here.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see them. Sorry.
Yeah, get
for scale. Monitor. Boy, those are huge geysers.
They are. Well, that's part of the point is a sense of scale.
Which Old Faithful to shame.
Well, that's always a difficult thing. One of the most difficult things in space art is you're doing things that are unfamiliar. And sometimes, as I said, you have a hard time conveying a sense of scale on somebody that's really alien. So you have to do something to put the viewer into the picture, in a sense. Sometimes you can do that, like on Mars, with foreground details. People have seen rocks. They know what a rock looks like, how big a rock is. So you don't need little figures in something like this, because you've put stuff in the foreground that's familiar, and it gives the viewer a mental anchor. And if they accept that foreground, they accept the reality of that, they're kind of hooked in accepting the reality of the entire picture. So you can have something funny up in the sky, Saturn or Jupiter, and people will accept that because they've accepted the familiar part of the picture. So it's kind of a nice, it's kind of a trick. Total heel bonds on Io. It's this Matterhorn-like peak of solid sulfur. It sticks up out of the middle of Io. And I like painting lava, so this is Europa up here. And I'm not sure what to say about it other than what it is, and it was fun to do. I think something about space art too that's important is that space art is really a subset of landscape painting. And so I think a good space painting needs to succeed as a good landscape painting. Can't just succeed on the novelty of the subject, you know. Just because there's something funny in the sky, like Saturn or something, isn't enough to sustain the picture. It has to be a good landscape as well. It has to be a good painting. Whether I'm doing really good paintings or not, it's not for me to judge. But that's the goal, is to do something that's a good landscape, a good composition, all the things that make a good landscape. And then with something funny in it. It's unfamiliar. but it can't exist just on the novelty of the subject alone. There's just a couple more before it's this Saturn scene from Titania. No, wait, Tethys. It's all those old T moons. It's this umpty miles wide, flat bottom canyon that stretches halfway around this little moon. And you can never go wrong with Saturn. But this is another example, though, where I think you need to have a believable anchor for the viewer so you can put something strange in the sky. If the entire picture is nothing but strange stuff, then it lapses over into fantasy, I think, into most people's minds. No matter how real it may be, they can't accept it. So you need something, you need a visual anchor.
So Ron, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, one of the questions I was curious about was you've obviously worked prior to the digital age as an artist. How much, and from what you mentioned previously, you've adapted quite well to using digital tools in your work. Have you ever thought that that the traditional method that you had used prior to is something you would never go back to?
Well, actually, I will be getting to that where I've come back to it.
Oh, okay.
give me about 4 more slides and I'll show you.
Okay.
I have a proprietary interest in Pluto. My Pluto file has probably 20 or 30 illustrations in it. Partly because of that Pluto stamp that I did. By the way, the stamp is attached to the New Horizon spacecraft. And it's in the Guinness Book of World Records now as the stamp that's traveled furthest of any stamp in history. I have a picture of it on the spacecraft. It's a tiny little thing about this big on it. The only thing that worries me, though, I realized the other day when I saw a picture of the stamp on the spacecraft, it was never canceled. So that thing's going to come back someday.
Postage due.
I know. So this is a sunset on Pluto. The sun dogs are there partly because of realism and partly because they add a sense of cold and iciness to the picture that might not be there if it's just the sun setting.
Is this a black and white medium here, or is
practically?
Okay, I've just seen.
There's a little color in the sun dogs.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the parts of Pluto that aren't covered with those pink. I forget the name of those chemicals are. Tollens, I think they're called. It's pretty much black and white. It's like the Arctic. So there's some faint tints in here. Wish I could make it bigger for you, but I can't. Yeah, so my PowerPoint maker crashed and I couldn't reinstall it in time. Another Pluto scene is hot springs on Pluto. Pluto has signs of geothermal activity all over it. And there's ice volcanoes and signs of flooding, mud floods on Pluto. I've done pictures of all these. I could do a slideshow on Pluto if you wanted, because I really, really like this little planet. It's partly because I feel like I have a proprietary interest in it. These are hot springs, creating these terraces. No one's photographed these on Pluto yet, but I figure why not? It might be. They're plausible, at least.
I think we have time for about 5 more minutes, Ron, if you could.
Yeah, I should probably skip down here a little bit. I'll skip over the next ones and show you some of the recent things. Being sequestered, I pulled my paints out, started doing some space art and traditional media again. A lava tube on Mars, an eruption on Io, Saturn seen from Rhea. It's been fun getting my paints out again. I really enjoyed these. Scene on Mars with little guys. This is the most recent one. Is Pluto again. So I like Pluto.
Oh, I remember that.
I wanted to get a little bit in some technique because this is a special effects theme of this group. I thought I'd get into some of the more special effectsy kind of stuff that is involved in making some space art. And I'll skip over a few things if there's time. Back in the 1930s, an artist named Scriven Bolton, he was an amateur astronomer and amateur artist in England, came up with this technique of making plaster models of the lunar surface. And he would then paint on these photographs like this up here. And they're pretty cool. Well, about the same time he was working, Chesley Bonestell was working for the same newspaper in England that this guy was. So I think Bonestell got a bright idea. And when Bonestell started working in Hollywood as a special effects artist, a map painter, he started learning the techniques of building models like this. So this is a lunar mountain range that Bonestell built as a reference tool for the background panorama he did for Destination Moon. This is all modeling clay, gravel, sand, all kinds of stuff. A lunar crater Bonestell built, also for Destination Moon. It was split here so you could take it apart and take interior photos. There's another view of it. Well, Bonestell took this a step further and started doing actual landscapes. And what he would do is, you can see this piece of cardboard he glued here. He would take these model landscapes he had built, like this one, and paint on them. For example, this one. And these model landscapes allowed him to play with lighting. You know, he could adjust the lighting, move it around, kind of like you would do with a digital landscape. You know, he could experiment with lighting.
That's amazing.
When he got the lighting he liked, he made a large black and white print, mounted the print, and then colored it with transparent oil glazes. So one of the reasons this painting looks so photographically realistic is there's a large part of an actual photograph. He did the same thing with this. This is a photograph of a model lunar landscape that Chesley Bonestell created, and then painted on top of to add the colors and shading and the earth and the stars and everything. Bonestell also would make reference models. You'll like this one, Rick. That he'd use. He didn't paint these directly though. He just used these as visual references, so he could, for perspective.
You just earned a bonus 5 minutes, Ron. So keep going. You just earned a bonus 5 minutes. So keep going.
Well,
this is amazing.
That's the last Bonestell I'm going to show.
Oh.
the rest is mine. I only need 5 minutes.
These models are amazing.
Oh, I have photographs of dozens of these things. But I was taking a clue myself. For example, recently I had to do for Scientific American illustration of Oumuamua. So I made one out of modeling clay and gravel from the driveway. And this is the final illustration.
So that's what it is.
One of my theories is nothing looks more real than the real thing. So if you want a rocky object, why not make a rocky object? My wife's a really, really good model maker. So she made this little paper model of New Horizons for me. And it showed up here. And this illustration, this is an illustration I did of Pluto really a week before its arrival. It's for Astronomy Magazine talking about the flyby. And this is what I imagine Pluto would look like like a week before we actually got photos. So I got the color right, and that's about it. There's the little model again. And this is the other model too. I needed to do this bi-lobed asteroid, so I built one. This is made out of modeling clay and dusted with powdered cocoa, because cocoa gives a really nice color and lots of nice little textures. Did the same thing here. He said nothing looks more real than the real thing, so I made a real asteroid. Ditto, same little spacecraft, made out of paper. Well, I got my 20 minutes down pat. So
that's
amazing.
I
wish I had more things to decide there.
I love the
I wish I
models.
Well, if you want to, real quickly, since I have my extra 5 minutes, hang on one second. I'll show you some of the Chesley Bonestell things, if you'd like.
We'll go till 10 after. So you got 4 minutes.
All right. CB models.
Because I know there's a lot of modeling fans that are in the audience that this is candy for them.
Yeah, I'll just show you a few. This one.
These are all Chesley Bonestell, again, models that were used in
these are all models he made or had made for himself, and he would use them for lighting and perspective.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what God meant spaceships to look like.
Are these in your book on Bonestell that you had?
I think there's a few of them.
Okay.
They gave him a chance, once again, try different angles, different lighting, different perspective. I would like to know what happened to these. It's only about two have ever survived. And I suspect he destroyed them when he was done with them. There's a detail in one of his lunar landscapes. Like I said, there's a lot of them. I was looking for the spacecraft here. Tabletop lunar landscape. Yeah, I think I think that used up my time.
Excellent. Well,
any questions?
Excellent. We did have one earlier on, and this would probably be something that could be addressed to all of in our group about speaking to schools. There's one person from Costa Rica who was wondering if you give talks online, I'm sure via Zoom to school kids, and I imagine they could I could forward their email to you, and you could be in touch with them. And
I do it all the time. I talk to schools all the time.
Okay, that'd be great to inspire some of the young people into careers in this field. Would be excellent.
I do my best to discourage them. I don't need the competition.
Okay, well, with that, we'll move on to our last presenter. Thank you very much, Ron. And we'll move on to Rick Sternbach. Rick, you're still there, I'm assuming?
Oh, you bet.
Thanks for being so patient. Rick has been a space and science fiction artist since the early 1970s. He's a founding member and fellow of the International Association of Astronomical Artists. Beginning in the late 1970s, Rick added film and television illustration and special effects to his repertoire with productions like Star Trek: The Motion Picture, The Last Starfighter, Future Flight, and the original Cosmos miniseries, for which he and other members of the astronomical art team received an Emmy Award, the very first for visual effects. Rick also twice received the coveted Hugo Award for Best Professional Science Fiction Artist in 1977 and 1978. With the rebirth of Star Trek, the franchise, beginning with The Next Generation, Rick was one of the first employees hired to update the Trek universe. He created hundreds of props and vehicles for the franchise, including graphic designs for the Star Trek Nemesis feature film. In 2015, Rick was included in the special committee advising the National Air and Space Museum on the restoration and conservation of the 11-foot Starship Enterprise filming miniature. So without further ado, Rick Sternbach.
Thank you. Let me get my screen going here. All right. Can you all see this?
I see something.
Right.
There we go.
There we are.
Okay. Well, this is this first section here is going to be, I mean, very similar to the things that Ron and Vincent were talking about. You know, what inspired me, like, you know, a kid growing up in the 50s with comic books and cartoons and science fiction movies and all of that stuff. And, you know, being able to get into reading books about space travel. I mean, who hasn't read From the Earth to the Moon? Okay. And the Lensman series, I just ate these up in school. These were a couple of covers by Jack Gaughan. I'll get into some of the other artists that I got to know over the years. You know, I watched the Buck Rogers and the Flash Gordon serials on TV. You know, and other movies that that really got me excited. You know, we talked about Destination Moon, things to come with Raymond Massey. Frau and Mond, I got to see later. These were just, you know, incredible steps toward, you know, actual space flight. Oh, now what? What happened? Oops, hold on.
There have been a couple guests who have had trouble with getting the PowerPoints to go forward their normal way. You might want to try a different arrow or going up or down or fiddling around.
Or if you're on a laptop, tap your pad. That's what Mark was doing.
Okay, well, hang on. There we go. Okay, and well, we've seen this picture. You know, in grade school, you know, I got to see books like Conquest of Space and Exploration of Mars. And,
Rick, we need you to share your screen again.
No, you're seeing it, but we're not.
It sounds great.
All right, hang on.
It's okay.
It's a beautiful model back there, Rick.
Wait,
a couple of them.
Hold on. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, you see that?
Yep.
All right, let me go back to play. Okay, now can you see it?
Beautiful.
Yep. Super. Okay, so you know, these images filled my eyeballs. You know, back when I was a kid in the 50s, watching movies like When Worlds Collide. The Day the Earth Stood Still, and you know, who would have thunk it? I would end up working for Robert Wise. You know, 20 plus years later on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Rolf Klepp. I mean, look at this beautiful cutaway. You know, I was eating all of this stuff up. Forbidden Planet. I don't know. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this movie. And the Disney Man in Space films. It turns out that one of our producers on Trek, Bob Justman, worked with Ward Kimball on some of these films. So, you know, when I ran into Bob one afternoon on the lot, I said, wait a second, you're the reason I became a space artist? And we had a good laugh about it, but you know, the animations on the models, you know, I was just, you know, enthralled by this stuff. Every single episode of Men into Space I saw when it was first aired. And there's that lunar ship, you know, the models behind me. I just love the color. I love the detail. I decided to, you know, put a few extra little, you know, greeblies and change a few things around. But, you know, I decided I wanted a model of this thing. So I made one. Now, who hasn't seen First Spaceship on Venus? fun movie. But you know, you look at the control room, the bridge of the ship, the Cosmostrator, and there's two control positions and a main view screen and a circular bridge and a multinational crew. Where have we seen that before? Robinson Crusoe on Mars. I wanted Christopher Draper's compact. I wanted that instrument pack so badly. Saw this movie when it first came out on a rainy Saturday afternoon, and I sat through two showings of it. And coincidentally, the same year that Robinson Crusoe on Mars came out was the pitch and the first pilot for Star Trek. Okay, and they were both Paramount releases. 2001, you know, I went to the theater with my dad back in '68, and just fell in love with all this stuff. Now, when I got into the art world, I started with this cover for Harry Stein's article on spaceflight. And I was welcomed into the group of artists at Analog, like Vincent and John Schoenherr and Jack Gaughan and Kelly Frias. And, you know, I was a newbie. I learned very quickly about these other artists, you know, met up with them at conventions. I mean, we talk about John Schoenherr. Ron and I went to go visit him in Virginia. I guess we were trying to go see a launch at Wallops.
Yeah.
You know, but Schoenherr's work, you know, wonderful. You know, the looseness of the style. Okay. I discovered over the years that I was doing cover paintings, and so I was never going to be a painter like the rest of the Analog stable. I just was, you know, that was not something I really would be able to keep up, because I was more into designing things. Okay, and yes, that helped me later on. So I got into the hardware. I got into the astronomy stuff. You know, I tried to include a lot of astronomical things with my painting. You know, crazy heavy into the airbrush. You know, and the art directors that I ended up working with and the editors, you know, they knew what I was doing, you know, knew what I was into, and they gave me assignments, you know, that best fit, you know, my interests. So I had a fun time doing all of this. Now you see this the Tricentennial by Joe Haldeman, the Analog cover. Okay, that painting is right back there. That's the original. 1976 was the year that there was a Star Wars exhibit at the Mid-American Worldcon where I got to see Ralph McQuarrie's art. And my jaw just fell open. And I got to meet up with folks like Charlie Lippincott, who was the publicist, and Gary Kurtz, one of the producers. And I'm looking at Ralph's art along the walls of this exhibit room, and I'm thinking, oh my God, could I do anything like that? You know, could I get into motion picture and television work? Took another year, but you know, I made a trip out to LA. And you know, I was painting along the way, but I met up with maybe 7 or 8 different art directors at different studios and showed off my stuff. The folks at Paramount who were doing Star Trek II, the second 5-year mission of the Enterprise, they, you know, production designer Joe Jennings didn't have anything for me, you know, but he was old school. He was upfront and honest about, you know, what might happen later down the line. And he said, you know, be patient. You know, even before the Star Trek stuff, you know, I was doing more astronomical based art. You know, wrote a few articles for Science Digest magazine. I had a great time doing a Starship article for the Bussard ramjet. Bob Bussard sat in my living room in Irvine, California. And he was sketching and calculating. He was figuring out right on a like you know, back of the envelope kind of pen scratches how much radiator acreage would be needed for his new ramjet. And I'm sitting there just totally amazed that he's sitting right next to me, you know, giving me pointers on what his ramjet should look like. And this was the end result. Robert Forward was another good friend. I got to illustrate a few of his stories. And he was a real promoter of the laser light sail. So I got to include the light sail in the Starship article for, you know, with some of the paperback books, and I got to do for Del Rey and pocket books. You know, they weren't strict. You know, they weren't, you know, photographic astronomical art. You know, I tried to force myself to get brighter colors in there, you know, more stylistically loose things, but you know, I wasn't, again, I wasn't really able to do this sort of artwork that was really meant to sell books. Did some, you know, did some private commissions, and I was just nuts about cetaceans, and you know, tried to think of ways to get them into space. And this was a commission where the customer said, "Well, you know, do whatever you want." And so I did. I'm also crazy about actual space hardware. You know, historical spacecraft, historical launch vehicles, future vehicles that we might be able to make. Okay, this thing over my other shoulder. Okay, I love building models. You know, maybe use them later in artwork. Maybe to build them as 3D objects, or do them as 3D renders in a program like Modo or Maya or Lightwave. You know, Ron talked about a lot of the digital art, and in the IEEE, we are seeing lots of you know, new things being done in the digital area, and there's a nice clearer picture of the solar system ship. Every single part of this ship could be lofted by an existing launch vehicle, or a launch vehicle that we sort of think is coming down the line. You know, could we actually build this? This particular version here would take maybe 45 or 50 launches. I think maybe. You look at the International Space Station, there's over 100 launches involved in that already. So, you know, do we have the will? Do we, you know, can we provide the funding for a trip, you know, out to Mars, or reconfigure this kind of spacecraft to go to Venus, go to Mercury, go to the outer planets? Now, you know, half of me is definitely split between, well, all of me is split between half real science and half, you know, science fiction. And Star Trek was actually a nice way to kind of do both. When I started with Trek, it was on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I eventually was hired by Joe Jennings, to work on the feature film, and I got to see what Dave Kimball was doing along the way. If you know the name Kimball, he has done cutaways of just about every mechanized thing on the planet: sports cars, oil rigs, tanker ships, and he was hired to do a cutaway of the Enterprise. So I was watching, Kimball's art developing while we were doing more things like sets and graphics back at Paramount Pictures. I also got involved in helping Star Trek: The Motion Picture get with JPL, because Voyager was a key character in the film. So we got the PAO office to give us blueprints and photos. A number of us went out to the lab. Gene Roddenberry and Harold Michelson, who took over for Joe Jennings as production designer. Harold came out. I went with them, and and we got to see what was going on at JPL back in early '78. And one of our set designers, Dick McKenzie, we call him Spuds. Dick McKenzie kind of took the reins of converting JPL's blueprints and the photos of the engineering mock-up into the version that you see on the stage. So we actually, built this at Paramount. Now, for some of the other work that I did on Next Generation, I just fell in love with tons of flight manuals and contractor documents and all that sort of stuff. And this would lead us to do things like the Next Gen Tech Manual. This particular page here says basically, if you accidentally throw this switch during launch, don't set it back because you will blow the escape tower. So we used a lot of the NASA documentation and contractor documents for the tech manual, and we told everybody in excruciating detail how the Enterprise worked.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
This is one of the things that inspired me to work for JPL.
Yay! Yeah. And one of the cool things about working on Next Gen is we got to talk to a number of scientists and engineers along the way, including Dr. Steve Howe, who was with Los Alamos at the time, and Steve gave me all the schooling I needed on matter-antimatter propulsion. So we worked that into the book and provided tech notes to the writers and producers. So we kind of kept them honest while playing with things that we can't exactly do yet, like FTL. I helped design things like this lifeboat, folks might recognize the fact that the seats in the lifeboat were inspired by the couches on the shuttle. Other designs, I got to draft up and sketch lots and lots of different props and vehicles, according to what was in the scripts, or what we thought might be visible, down the line. And I don't know anybody who wasn't jazzed about the original Galileo, which was found in horrible condition in Iowa, not Iowa, Ohio, I think it was. The remains of it were purchased. There was a big funding campaign to restore this thing, and there it is. And a lot of what was in the Galileo, you know, inspired me when it came time to do other shuttlecraft. Okay, a lot of these vehicle things, you know, for me, it came down to, okay, what do these different parts do? Okay, you know, internally, I wanted to know how do the RCS thrusters work? How do the Bassard collectors work? What is the, you know, what is the reason behind the blue glows off the engine nacelles? Okay. The writers didn't have to know all that stuff. I wanted to, just in case. And we also had a wonderful opportunity to name a shuttle pod after Dr. Farouk Elbaz. The story that I heard was that his kids were watching Trek one night, saw the name on the shuttle pod and said, Dad, come here, quick. You know, we normally named a lot of our shuttlecraft after scientists and explorers. And to me, you know, Elbaz was a perfect fit. Starfleet trainers, okay. You know, why do Star Trek type craft have wings? Well, A, it looks cool, and B, it kind of helps during atmospheric flight. Delta Flyer was a ton of fun. A lot of these craft, though, there's our set designers who were maybe, you know, 3 or 4 tables away from me. Okay, they already had the cockpit designed while I was still working on the exterior. Okay, so, you know, from a special effects standpoint, okay, we had to make sure that the CG artists who were modeling this in polygons, okay, had all of the information they needed about the interior. Okay, so you know, I had to incorporate the window patterns that the set designers were building, you know, and incorporate that into the model. And normally, you know, it was a pretty seamless process. It worked rather well. All the stylistic things that we incorporated worked very nicely. I got to do Admiral Janeway's Future Shuttle. It has a lot of the same sorts of parts as the other type shuttlecraft, but you know, in a lot of cases, I had to kind of make things a little bit more swoopy, but still recognizable as a Starfleet shape. Now, if you go backwards in time, around you know, when Zephram Cochrane was playing around with FTL flight, we had an episode called Friendship One where we had a very old style, you know, FTL probe, and you know, you can kind of tell if you look at a lot of these shapes over the years. Yes, this is a very early type of faster than light spacecraft.
Rick, I think we'll have about 5 more minutes if we could to wrap up.
Okay, yeah, we'll blast through it. Torpedoes, you know, I loved working out the interior guts of things like photon torpedoes and probes. This probe that you see in the cutaway, it's got deuterium fuel, it's got little microfusion reactor nozzles, it's got an antimatter supply, it's got an antimatter chamber where, you know, the explosion actually happens. We got into lots of various, you know, deep space arrays for studying, you know, other things in the Milky Way. Some of these were miniatures and some of these were CG. And you know, we had some wonderful CG modelers and physical modelers, folks like Greg Jean and Tony Meininger. We had you know, we gave them all the information they needed. You know, I would do like 5-foot wide blueprints for things like the Voyager spacecraft. And we also did, you know, concepts on space stations. Deep Space Nine was, this was a real, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? My thesaurus has disappeared. We had a number of people in the Deep Space Nine art department contributing little stylistic ideas. And I ended up doing the blueprints. There's the miniature, the 6-foot model that Tony Meininger's crew built. And this lasted, you know, a good 7 years of the run of the show. Some space stations were totally CGI. This was a nice look back at a Mars mission. You know, multinational involvement here. The Europeans would build the nuclear stage. The Russians would build the habitat. ISS derived, you know, sections up front. Now with CG, we didn't have to worry about things like the electricals to a model or mounting the model because, you know, as a polygon thing, you can do whatever you want with it. We even looked into, you know, ISS interior ideas for the inside of the spaceship. And right down to the little numbers on the windows, okay? And I designed a bunch of labels for the interior of the spacecraft. This was an alien spaceship, and it was very much inspired by the Russian N-1. More Starfleet things, you know, for me, you know, if you looked at a spacecraft, it was either an alien thing you never saw before, or it was a Starfleet ship with very Starfleet style to it. And we'll end here with Voyager. This was a 5-foot miniature. They also built a CG model, and you know, with things like Voyager, I had to work with the visual effects folks during the initial design, okay, to work in mounting points for the miniature, to work in little hidden umbilicals where they could run the electrical lines for the lighting. And, you know, to go from a model like this that is controlled by the physics of the miniature to CG models where you didn't have to worry about the mount points. That was quite an eye opener. You know, so that's my tale, going from you know, space and science fiction art to you know, iconic spaceships.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rick.
Rick, one of the things that really impresses me about your spacecraft designs is that are the plausibility. I mean, I'm very non-tech oriented. You never see spacecraft in my pictures. I mean, my pencil, I have no idea what goes on inside my pencil sharpener. But when I look at your artwork, though, even if I don't quite understand, say, the rationale that goes into even your invented technology, it looks right, and it looks like it means something. I'm always very annoyed by the science fiction model, spacecraft models that look like they've been breaded in model parts. There's a random nonsense to it that doesn't seem right. But everything in yours looks like it has a function. It's there for a reason.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And I am very technical. I work at JPL, and here, I got to hold this up. I practically memorized this book when I was younger. And yeah, it's really amazing. I'm trying to build some of this stuff, and it's not working, though. I'm going to have to talk to you about it.
I had a number of engineer and scientist people that I could talk to, and you know, in a lot of my Facebook posts, I will talk about old school. Okay, and these are people who, you know, they would give their time freely. They would answer questions. You know, I've encountered you know, art director types who wouldn't give you the time of day. But I got to know the scientists and the engineers and read a ton of books. You know, I couldn't, you know, I know some words about things like, okay, the modulus of the something, of the bending moments. And I could, you know, I totally understand what specific impulse is for rocket engines. Okay, so I can speak the lingo, even though I never like went to school for this kind of stuff. Yeah. And I like putting in a hint of reality into the designs that I did for track. You know, you know, working with Ron Cobb on the last Starfighter. Oh, just, you know, Ron was into the same sorts of things. Okay. You know, he had a mechanical sense that I really totally loved. And it was great to be able to talk with him about these things. Like every Monday morning, we would compare notes. Hey, did you see that article in Aviation Week?
Well, I've got some questions from some of our audience members here to kind of wrap up the last 15 or so minutes of our session. Again, we can go, but we have a few stockpiled here that I'd like to ask our presenters. One here is from Bob. This is for Rick in particular. He asks, is there a spacecraft or object that you designed that never made it on screen and you wish it had? That you can talk about.
Most everything that I did, let's say for the Trek franchise, okay, we were working on such a quick schedule that the ratio of accepted designs to rejected doodles, most everything was like, get it out of here and get it built.
We got a deadline, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have some doodles, I have some preliminaries that eventually evolved into something that was built. Okay, but you know, if some of the doodles were passed over, oh, that's fine. We got paid every Thursday.
Well, this next question is from John, and this probably directed perhaps to Vincent and Ron in particular. He asks, you talked about having something realistic in the foreground of your paintings. Have you found that the more realistic you make the foreground, the more new and novel you can make the rest of the image?
Yes. That was easy. Yeah, well, it's easy. I think that's exactly right. As I said, you need to give that viewer something to hang on to that's familiar. And the more they can hang on to it, I think the more you can get away with in the sky or elsewhere in the picture.
You know, specifically what a really accomplished science fiction artist does is integrate the known with the unknown. And it's your ability to hide the seams between what is and what isn't where you really excel. So yeah, I think Ron is absolutely right.
Got a question from Matt Cushman in particular. I'm going to use his last name because many of our guests are familiar with Matt and his work. He asked, what is the sci-fi art business like now for artists compared to what it was like back in the 60s and 70s, specifically the pros and cons?
Go, Vinny.
This would probably be maybe Vincent and Ron in particular, since they're dealing with specifically the art.
Well, Vincent does a lot more science fiction art than I do. So.
Well, one thing that I'll say is there were generally better times for science fiction illustrators. The economics of the entire field of illustration have been hugely impacted by digital technology. What illustrators do is predicated on or priced on the basis of the time consumed in creating it. And the assumption is if you're creating it digitally, well, it's taking you no time at all. So what I could tell you is that 20 years ago, the field got hit rather severely with a kind of collapse of the fee structures. That's a significant difference. There's still an enormous amount of work out there to be had. And people like myself have been gravitating to fields outside of publishing where the paycheck is a little like, for instance, aerospace illustration and film and TV related art. And I've seen a huge increase in the number of conceptual pieces that I do for film and TV as compared to the amount of magazine and book illustration I've been doing. So I know is a fact that the industry has changed, and mainly based on its fee structure. The sheer volume of work is still there, but illustrators have had to do a lot more work to make the same amount of income.
That's interesting because the print media, I'm always amazed that analog is still in print as a traditional magazine. So much of the digital world and ebooks and so forth has basically replaced a lot of print media. And so many times that audience was there for you, that print media, and now it's digital and it's almost anyone can be out there to do it because everyone has the tools available on their laptop. So almost anyone.
Also, with analog circulation has dwindled. It's got a circulation of about 20,000 copies. That's practically a fanzine.
Wow.
But what matters is that the publisher is smart enough to realize that the real money, and this is true all across the spectrum of American publishing, publishers continue to publish because they realize the real value is in licensing. So if they get an option on a story for a feature film, they become partners with the author, and that's what keeps them going. The publishers of analog, the current publishers of analog, are in the puzzle book business. They know nothing about science fiction, but then neither did Condé Nast back in the day when people like Rick and I were working for the magazine. They were mainly a woman's magazine publisher. So ambivalence about what it is that we do has actually worked for us, but also against us. So really, modern publishing is really about licensing. People read less. They stream movies. They go to Netflix. And most of the people I know working in the movie business are now working in television and hoping to get one of these long cycle series going that they can work on. But the industry's really changed.
One of the things I've always been fascinated with, and I've shared some of this with Ron and some of the research that I've been doing through email exchanges with him, is the impact and the influence that industry aerospace artists had, particularly in the 50s and 60s, with such publications as Missiles and Rockets, Aviation Week and Space Technology later on. And I'm wondering in particular with Vincent and you, did you have a chance to rub elbows with any of these pioneers that did a lot of that visionary work to sell products in the trade journals? And how much of an influence was that in your work when those publications were kind of the internet of our time, so that we could see a lot of this amazing artwork that they did in the 50s and 60s?
You know, Glenn, and I'm sure that my colleagues, my fellow panelists will kind of concur with this. I was a fan, and you know, I was in awe of these people. You know, many years ago, Ron was gracious enough to share Bonistel's phone number with me, and I had that number by my phone in my studio for decades. When Bonistel finally died, I called his widow Hilda to express my condolences, and she said, you know, Chesley knew who you were, and he would have loved to have gotten a call from you.
Oh.
So I was kicking myself. But, you know, it's a funny thing. I mentioned Charles Knight in my presentation. Ray Harryhausen and I worked together on a proposed remake for Beast in 20,000 Fathoms back around 1983 or so. And we met in the city at one point when we were developing this stuff. And he said to me, you know, when I was a kid, Willis O'Brien, the great animator who worked on King Kong, told me that I was going to get nowhere in this business unless I learned how to draw. So I enrolled at the Art Students League in New York. And so I was living in New York for a couple of years while I studied drawing and painting. And he said, you know, I was astonished in the same way that I found O'Brien's phone number in the Los Angeles phone book. I looked up Charles Knight's phone number and I found out where he lived. And he said, you know, I would go to the lobby of his apartment building every day, and I would see him pass within 5 feet of me every morning, and I could never summon the courage to tap him on the shoulder and introduce myself. So I'm not the only wimp in the crowd, you know. Yes, I knew Bob McCall. Bob and I did a couple of panels together at the Society of Illustrators, and I knew a few other people. I'm sure Ron knew a lot of these people too, Sid Mead and people of that sort. But by and large, I was tongue-tied and dumbfounded to talk to these people, and I was even worse with the authors. Sad and pathetic, but that's life.
I've got a question here from Brother Bob. He asks, are any of the presenters familiar with space art exhibitions organized by Dan Durda at the LPSC, DPS, and other scientific conferences? Have any of them provided art for the exhibits? I think LP is the Lunar Planetary Science.
Yeah, I think these are largely, I think, in conjunction with or in collaboration with the IAAA, which is the International Association of Astronomical Artists. Right. You go to IAAA.org and to find out about that. So I think some of these are done in collaboration with the IAAA, and some I think Dan has done. I haven't taken part in them yet, so I don't know the details.
Yeah, Dan Durda and Simon Krieger are, you know, they've headed up a number of exhibit collaborations with, you know, various institutions. We either have something going on right now, or soon we'll have something at the U.S. Air Force Museum, in Ohio. So, you know, we're always looking for, you know, ways to get our art out into the world. You know, and the big event for us normally is Space Fest in Tucson. Well, with the pandemic and everything, you know, we don't know if Space Fest is going to happen this year or not, but stay tuned.
I know Space Fest was where I first became aware of that organization through the exhibit, the last one that they had in 2019, and that's where I saw you again, Rick, there as well. So, and it was wonderful meeting a lot of these folks, and that's a wonderful event. But unfortunately, the majority of the folks that are there are quite old, because a lot of them are astronauts from the Apollo era, and so it's tricky to have them present in this current environment. So it's good to be cautious, but hopefully they'll get back on the ground again. I've got another question here. This would be for perhaps Rick, but in general, everyone. So we had a talk yesterday by Mark Raymond from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory that was very, very good on ion propulsion, and and other terms that he used in some of the NASA missions that were from Star Trek. This question is, the ion propulsion phrase was named after an episode of Star Trek Spock's Brain, according to Mark Raymond's talk. Did Rick Sternbach bring the ion propulsion phrase from NASA? If yes, we have a full loop there.
Well, most of the propulsion schemes that I know connected to Trek are impulse and warp. Okay,
and that was one thing, yeah, Rick mentioned too.
Yeah,
or Mark Raymond, excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, based on what we know about ion propulsion, it's like, okay, ounces of thrust. You know.
Yes, you have to have a lot of time.
You know, so I can't say that I was ever a fan of using the word ion in Trek, so I hardly ever did.
I know ion propulsion is one of those terms that I've always been intrigued with, because it was kind of the adopted darling of visionaries in the 50s and 60s. You'll look at trade journals and you'll see ion electric propulsion, you know, be displayed in a very visionary sense as being, this was the thing. And even Gene Roddenberry, you know, he wanted the Enterprise to not have rockets. He didn't want flames coming out of the warp engines. You know, he wanted this thing either electrical propulsion or ion propulsion or whatever. So it was the darling for quite a while, and then it just kind of went away. It kind of went away and was replaced. And I think that was in part because NASA and the industry in general settled on designs to get us to the moon, and settled on, you know, the propulsions that worked within our budget. And so ion propulsion kind of got set aside. So now it's come back as a very viable means for robotic probes as an economical way to do it, because you've got tons of time and tons of space and no people on board that you have to worry about keeping alive during all that time.
Yeah, one thing I could tell you, that the Solar System Explorer, yeah, it's got
in the back there.
Huh?
In the back of you there that you're pointing to?
In the back.
Yeah, the model.
It's got 3 nuclear thermal rocket engines. Okay, heavy thrust, right? And it's also got 3 banks of like Hall effect thrusters. Okay, for cruising, right? Okay. Now, the fuel for the ion thrusters is like xenon, okay? One of the fuel tanks, one of the xenon tanks on this bruiser behind me is twice the world output of xenon per year.
We're going to have to mine that from one of the asteroids or something, maybe.
The ion thrusters are extremely efficient, but they're kind of the Toyota Prius of the rocket world. So maybe that's why they're out of favor in science fiction.
I think Mark Raymond told me one time that the pressure that an typical ion drive is like what you feel when you hold a piece of paper in your hand.
Right.
But that's basically what it is.
If you do that for years, though, you can get going really fast.
Yeah.
And they're very reliable, as we've proven. You're right. The Prius of interplanetary probes is basically what they are. Well, with that, do we have any other questions that Steve, since you're on live there, do you have any questions for our panelists? Or I'm looking to see if there's any others that are mentioned in our chat room here tonight.
I just thought it was really amazing. The Star Trek technical manual, there's even an explanation in there, if I remember correctly, about why the ship still has gravity even when it loses all the rest of its power. I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah. Well, you know, the gravity generators, you know, have a spin down time.
Right.
Where you can still walk around.
I love that.
And for those that aren't familiar with who Steve is, that may have just come in for this session and not the session before this, Steve is an engineer from West Michigan in Grand Rapids who works for JPL and works particularly on the rover Perseverance that just landed on Mars on Thursday. And he gave a wonderful talk prior to this one that's out on YouTube. So if you missed it and you want to catch it, you can watch it on our YouTube channel to see his presentation. So here's a prime example of someone who's been inspired like myself through the visionaries of these folks that are presented here, that have carried on the visions of some of these other folks and made them in things that we can relate to when we were kids and when we're adults.
Glenn, we've got a question from Catherine. I'm gonna ask her to.
Okay, excellent.
Hi, it's not so much of a question as I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you all. I got to tour Moffett Field and see Skylab artist renderings when I was a kid. And I was like, are those photographs? They look so amazing. And at Moffett, they had to tell me, no, those are drawings, but I thought they were photos. And then the original Cosmos series, I loved that. I could hardly wait every week to watch it when I was in junior high. And of course, book covers, right? To see the book covers of all my favorite Heinleins. So thank you all. This has been a wonderful afternoon.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks. Yeah.
Any other folks that would chime in? We're up at 5 o'clock right now.
I just sent
maybe take one more
John in the comments.
Okay, there's one more from John. That's the one you sent, Dina. Says, this one, I guess, would be addressed in particular to Rick. How much did the Star Trek actors interact with you? Both probably starting with the motion picture, and then I guess would be through the other franchise spinoffs.
On the motion picture, I didn't get to interact with the cast that much. Yeah, I met up with Bill Shatner, and I mostly hung out with like the prop master and people like that.
Well, I think there was a neat story in motion picture about James Doohan about the shuttle.
Gosh, that one.
That's
yeah,
priceless. If you want to share that.
Okay, real quick. Okay, I got to work about 10 minutes late one morning, and there was a note on my desk. Robert Wise wants to see you immediately.
He was the director. Yeah. Sound of Music.
So I look at this note and I gulp. It's like, oh my God, what did I do? So I got down to stage and they were doing a travel pod scene with, Kirk and Scotty. And I go up to Robert Wise and I said, Mr. Wise, I got your note. What can I do for you? And he very quietly just ushers me to the back of the travel pod. And we walk up inside the pod and he said, you designed these controls, right? And I said, yes, sir. And then he said, tell Scotty what to do. Oh my God. Okay. All right. So I had Jimmy come up to the pod. I said, look, Jimmy, when you first get in, okay, turn on the environmental controls and the lighting controls, and they're over here on this panel, on this side panel. And then you can walk to the front and get the propulsion system started up, get ready to undock, and do your little trip around the Enterprise. The studio electricians would then fire up the lights behind the control panels. Right. And that worked great. So Wise thanks me. And I go back to work. It's like, oh, phew.
Well, here's another question.
One other quick little thing. Okay. On Next Gen, we got to know most everybody. Okay. One morning, Patrick Stewart waltzes into the art department in full uniform, right? And Mike Okuda and I were the tech heads, right? So he says, "Excuse me, lads. When I make a bit of text disappear with Control X, I know I can bring it back, but where does it go?" And he had just bought like a new Macintosh, right? So we explained, oh yeah. You can cut out a bit of text, you can bring it back, you can put it somewhere else, and he thanked us for that. We got to meet up with a lot of these different folks. Jonathan Frakes would come up to the art department every so often. Denise Crosby came up to use our telephone, and I would just sit there and like, I would just sit there and sigh, you know. Yeah, I mean, good bunch.
One question I had for Ron, and I might be mistaken on this, but there was one of your paintings that you showed that was, I think it was a painting, acrylic or regular painting, not digitally done, of Pluto. So I think it was an older one, but correct me if I'm wrong, but did you have a series of your paintings that were published in National Geographic?
No, you're thinking of Ludek Peszek.
Okay, because that image it was a flashback to my youth, because there was a cover issue of National Geographic that had a rendering of, I think it was from Titan, showing Saturn from Titan, and it was filled with paintings of like yours from the solar system. And I remember cutting those out and pasting them as a kid on cardboard. Is this bringing back memories?
Oh yeah, Ludek Peszek is one of my heroes, actually. I met him in Switzerland 30 years ago. I have all of his books all signed. I have one of his paintings. But the painterliness of his work really influenced me a lot. Bonastell's work was almost too perfect everyone to emulate. You know, there's how could you copy a Bonestell? But Peszek's were realistic, but they were also painterly. And that he really gave me a jump start on what I do. But that's who you're thinking of.
Excellent. Okay, sorry.
It was
probably in the early 70s. Maybe that's right time frame. It was a while back, but that one painting of Pluto reminded me of that.
National Geographic is sitting right over here next to me, actually.
Okay. Got another question here. This would probably be for Rick from Bruce. He asked, what was the inspiration for the Deep Space Nine station design?
Oh boy. I mean, you know, there were like 3 or 4 or 5 of us, you know, all doing doodles and concepts and one of the producer directives was very early on was like an alien oil platform. Okay, so we built a model of what looked like a gigantic alien oil rig. And then they said, nah, we want something different. Herman Zimmerman, our production designer, thought of a wheel shape. Rick Berman, our exec producer, liked the idea of a wheel shape. So we kind of, you know, changed directions. And Berman said something very interesting. He said, this should be a shape that any kid watching the show could draw in a few strokes. And he was right. He was absolutely right. You know, we every so often we would go off in just wacky directions, trying to get a handle on what the writers and producers wanted. And then a very simple directive would come down. Oh, okay. All right. So I did some very, you know, basic grayscale CG models of this circle, okay? And Herman Zimmerman and the other set designers, you know, they were thinking, you know, look, we have to think like Cardassians. So the space hardware had to look alien, and we wanted to establish a Cardassian appearance. So a lot of the stuff that you see on the interior sets, we borrowed a lot of those shapes and put them into the big miniature. All right. So it all eventually got the nod from the higher ups, and I finished off the blueprints. The Tony Meininger and Brazil Fabrication, you know, they built this 6-foot diameter model, and it turned out great.
Well, you could definitely see the Cardassian influence. I I mean, you know, look at the ridges. I mean, on their faces too. You know, the framing ridges.
And
their,
you know,
it's like they
the neck flare.
Exactly. It's carried over into the architecture of their ship. Of their,
so it was a bunch of us throwing ideas into a big pot, and I was picking stuff out and adding things to the blueprints. And again, you know, episodic television is a harsh mistress. You know, where we had to get this stuff out because if it, you know, if there was any kind of delay, we wouldn't make the air date.
Yep. One of the questions I have, and maybe I could direct this to Vincent, is I've been intrigued with the potential revival of the classic Universal monsters. Universal has tried this with the Mummy, which, you know, some degree may have succeeded, may have failed. And they're doing it again with King Kong in the recent King Kong versus Godzilla that's out here. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on, or maybe insider information, because you have been doing some drawings from the Creature of the Black Lagoon, which is a Universal property, of the efforts to try to revive Universal's monster franchise, to bring it to a new generation.
Well, you know, I think there are a couple of studios that are attempting to bring back the dead. You know, there are a whole group of investors who bought up Hammer Films, and they're trying to reboot Hammer Films. And Universal would love nothing more than to have the revered position they had at one time with their monster franchises. You know, there was the Big Five, and then the Creature from the Black Lagoon was added to that. And the last version of the Mummy, which was supposed to be a reboot, really crashed and burned. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were trying to build this as a team of monster fighters who were monsters themselves, grappling with their internal issues. And of course, it's entirely wrong-headed. The Creature, this goes back now to about 2005 or so. There's a fellow named Gary Ross. Gary Ross is the son of Arthur Ross, who wrote the original screenplay for Creature from the Black Lagoon. And Arthur Ross really basically fleshed out an idea that really came from William Allen. And so he developed the script, and Harry Essex finished it up. But Gary Ross wrote a screenplay for this remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon. And he made the cardinal mistake of thinking that the Creature from the Black Lagoon is a monster, which it isn't. It's actually got a character arc. If you look at the original 3 films, you see by the last film, the creature is the most human character in the entire cast. So I think whatever plans Universal has, and they've been trying mightily to refuel their pantheon of classic monsters, it's going to take people with an opposing thumb and an IQ to really bring them back to life. And they've got to be character driven, and they've got to be, and they have to harken back to at least an essence of the original designs. You know, when you think about the Frankenstein monster, you think about Dracula and so forth. You're really looking at makeup designs that were done by a guy named Janusz Piccola, who is better known as Jack Pierce. And his classic designs are what people expect. It was like when they tried to do the American version of Godzilla. Well, you know, people were expecting something that looked like a guy in a rubber suit. And even though the modern Godzilla is a homage to the original Godzilla, it looks like a guy in a suit, even though it's CGI. So it's going to require having the sensibility to understand what made those original franchises work. And
I think what might, I'm sorry.
Whether or not there are people in the movie industry who have the smarts to do that, I'm not entirely sure. But you were going to say something, Glenn.
Well, I know when The Shape of Water came out, and of course that won Academy Award for Best Picture, it reminded me so much of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and it gave me hope for a reboot in particular of The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I was perked up among them, the many pictures and paintings and drawings that you did, that you showed your version of the creature was fascinating. I was going to try to take a screen capture of it, but it was great. I think that was your drawing that you showed, and not Ron's. But it was great. And so it's just one company. We have a lot of science fiction, of course, but then there's the basic horror too that we can't forget, and that inspired a lot of us as we were growing up with the monsters from Universal. So I'm hoping that like you mentioned, there might be hope that someone will take the lead on that and bring some of those back in a coherent fashion.
Well, I think the most important thing is that you can update the costume. First of all, the idea that you might actually make another monster movie with a guy in a suit is not the dumbest idea in the world, because that's part of what made the creature work. But you want to have more points of articulation, and you want to be able to use CGI to supplement what an actor can do. So instead of hiring 20 actors to do the fire gag, you have one actor and you put him through his paces in the computer. But particularly in the last batch of those pencil drawings that you saw of Creature, I think even though there were more points of articulation and it was more the kind of thing that you would expect in the contemporary monster design field, it still has the classic look. You look at it and you think Creature from the Black Lagoon. Whereas a lot of the other designs that I've seen, you don't know what the hell you're looking at, because it's been so radically redesigned.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we got one more question, and then we'll try to close out with any final comments that our panelists may have, because we're getting up on 5:30 here. This question is from James. He's wondering, I guess it's addressed to Rick, if Rick was involved in the Planet of the Titans Star Trek project that was abandoned in 1977. I think that's referring to one of the concepts for the Star Trek, the motion picture, the big screen, the treatment.
Oh, they had canceled that, sometime before I got involved with the motion picture. Okay. But I can tell you that when Mike Miner, who was one of our illustrators on the motion picture, he was one of the first guys I ran into. He was a great friend of Bob Burns. We lost him much too soon in the 80s. But Mike Miner and I discovered a few boxes of material in the art department before the motion picture art department really got going. Okay, we found in these boxes a bunch of Ken Adam drawings, Ralph McQuarrie paintings, small scale paintings. Okay, and just tracings and some stuff that McQuarrie had done on vellum with marker, and we found all of this stuff from that that previous effort, it was interesting to go through that sort of archaeological dig to see what they had done. I don't think that it really affected what we were doing on the motion picture in terms of story. The story was really being developed as we were working up set designs and things. It was interesting to go back and see what they were thinking of.
Fascinating. I hope that's all that material still preserved in the Paramount archive somewhere.
And a lot of it, I believe, was published in the Art of Star Trek.
Okay.
The big coffee table book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fun stuff.
Excellent. Well, I think that's about all the questions that we have. Boy, folks have, you know, when we come to an end like this, it's like watching the end of a Trek Classic episode on Star Trek. There's kind of this sadness when you've got to return back to the realities of the COVID world and everything. And I hate to leave you guys because this has been pure escapism for me, as well as I'm sure the rest of the audience that we have out there. But that being said, I'd like to take any closing comments. Ron, maybe you could start as we kind of close out. Anything you'd like to close with?
My return to reality is returning to a room filled with rockets, spaceships, and space art. So
nothing wrong with that.
I live in a fantasy world. But anyway, thanks very much for inviting me to join you in this. It was a lot of fun, and it was great hanging out with some old friends, which I really enjoyed doing. And so just thanks for the invitation, and thanks for everybody participating.
You're more than welcome. You know, I remember, I think it was the Ray Bradbury. He did a series, I think around the time Amazing Stories in the 1980s. And he'd open every episode of the series where he would be sitting in his office and he would look around for inspiration for his next story, just because of all the things that were around him. And
I have no idea what this room is filled with.
I hope it's insured. All right, Vincent, what comments would you like to leave us with as we have to get back to the real world?
Well, to a large extent, I'm speechless. You know, first of all, like Ron, I'm very appreciative of the fact that you included me in here. I haven't seen Rick Sternbach in ages. I remember him as a kid.
Hey, come on! I saw you at Wonderfest.
We're all white. Wow. We're all white.
You know, it's this wonderful community of people who are bound to the dream, and I think that's the thing. This constant search for humanity to find its better selves, and for us to finally embrace that starry night and go into the vast out there. That's my fervent hope, and it's what keeps me going. But thank you, Glenn, for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And Rick, what comments would you like to leave us with?
I echo what my artistic friends have said. Thank you for inviting me, and it's great to see the turnout of all the Zoomies. Yeah. And you know, maybe we'll do this again sometime.
I'd like to.
Well, you're more than welcome. And as the youngest one in the bunch here, I have to confess that I am in utter awe of being in the presence of all three of these legends. These are people that I grew up with, and either seeing their artwork or watching Star Trek with Rick Sternbach, never dreaming that I've actually would be able to talk with them, you know, in a personal level via Zoom. So I guess if there's any blessing from COVID, it's allowing us to be able to do this and become familiar with this technology so that we can have these chats. So with that, I guess we'll close out. Roger that, because this is the last session. It's been wonderful 2 days, and all of us that were working behind the scenes are exhausted. So thank you so much for enduring for 2.5 hours this wonderful talk.
I want to thank you on behalf of Grand Valley. And just the last thing that came in at the last second, Bruce says that Costa Rica is going to have its own space agency, so we can expand the universe a little further with them. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Good night.
Well,
Good night.
Thank you.